So much has been written and said about the 9/11 terror attacks, but there's a new book, and it provides, for me at least, a very unique perspective. It is told by focusing on people, not famous people, but people who were unknown on 9/10, but they left their mark the following day. It is called Fall and Rise, the story of 9/11, and its author, Mitchell Zuckoff. He joined us to discuss. You didn't set out to write a book about why and what led to 9/11. Obviously, some of the principles get discussed in it, but it's really more, and I want to quote you directly, of to delay the descent of 9/11 into the well of history. And I can tell you from my perspective, when you have kids of a certain age, they almost define themselves if they were born after or before 9/11. And while obviously they all know it, it's impossible to convey unless you lived through it. Is that in part what you were trying to do? Because you didn't put any gauze over this. There's a lot of heartbreak in this book and a lot of rawness to it as well. When you set out to write it, was that the goal?
You know, we have all these other books about 9/11, but we don't have one that captures the day the way we felt it. Those of us who were there, those of us who covered it, those of us who experienced it. And so for both the generation who have no memories of their own, and for those of us who have memories that are starting to fade, could I capture all these events in a way that felt like you were there? And so that was definitely the goal.
You start the book on September 10th. I think I know why, but why did you choose to do it there rather than the aftermath?
For all of us who were there was a moment, there is a break in time. It's a beginning of a new era. And so you don't really understand the people or their fears, their hopes, their dreams, but the world changed on September 11th. And I felt you couldn't fully appreciate it unless you understood what their lives, what their, who they were on September 10th.
We all know what happened that day. Most of us know, a lot of the factors that even led to that day. But you talk about the people, and in many ways you did kind of the impossible, which is when you're reading their stories, you don't know in some cases the outcome of what's going to happen to these people because they're one of the multiple thousands that we lost on that day. So I'm going to let you choose names because I almost feel that I'm picking certain lives where they're all equal in this, but certain of them really jumped off. And one was Terry Schaefer. And I didn't know his story before your book, but he was that unfortunate soul who came upon the wreckage in Shanksville. And what he saw, and I understand why it took him years to talk about it, my God.
Here you have a guy, a volunteer fire chief in the little town of Shanksville, Pennsylvania, who had spent countless hours sort of mapping out his community, wondering where's the terrible tragedy going to happen. And that morning, he was working his regular job in the bottling plant in Johnston, Pennsylvania. And then he gets the call, and what he thought would be the worst thing that could ever happen would be a pileup on the highway turns into Flight 93's final destination. And so as he's getting closer, and I had him drive me that trail, we drove together on those roads, and he was describing what he was thinking, what he was fearing, and what he was hoping as he got there. And as you say, Rich, when he got there, clearly there was no one he could help, and he saw things. And as we walked along that pathway, again, we got out of the car and we walked the grounds together. He was in a way still seeing and feeling these terrible things that he had seen.
There's a lot of stories of not only heroism, which we obviously heard of, not only on that flight, but obviously in the towers, but the humanity also. And you talk about Ladder Company 6 and Josephine Harris, and more than just we knew that they ran into the towers while it was running out, we knew the story, but there was a human perspective to it, and also other stories about people who refused to leave others even when it was in the best interest of their safety. Talk about that story and others like it that stood out to you that obviously are in the book.
Sure. And you're getting at something so central to what I found while I was writing this. The number of cases of self-sacrifice, of heroism, of people being larger than they ever could imagine they were. And certainly the story of Ladder 6 inside the North Tower is a great example. So you have this fire captain, Jay Jonas, and he's leading the 6 men of Ladder 6 up the stairs, up the B stairwell. And they know they can't fight this fire on the high floors. There's not going to be enough water, there's not going to be enough time. They're hoping just to rescue people. But as they're climbing, Jay leaves the stairwell and sees that the South Tower has just collapsed. And he knows he has to get his men out of there. He knows now it's a race against time. But as they're descending in the North Tower, they come across the woman who had basically given up. Josephine Harris had walked down 60-odd floors, and her legs had given out. And so Jay and his men stopped and decided she is now part of Ladder 6. And Josephine could only go so fast, and they carried her when they could, and they helped her when they could. And they found themselves inside still between the 4th and 6th floor stairwell of the North Tower when it started to collapse. And they huddled together, and they crawled into fetal balls. And their heroism, though, ended up saving them. It's the most remarkable thing. It's truly a miracle of Stairwell B.
There's tons of heartbreak that needed to be part of the story, and you talk about the people we'll never know, but there was one story about a woman who was about to tell her parents that she was pregnant and never got to. And so many of those anecdotal stories that I think all of us can relate to, but you read it, it just breaks your heart all over again.
That is, frankly, it's by design. You can't sugarcoat this. Especially, we know on the plains, we know that these are going to be terrible outcomes on all 4 of these hijacked planes. And certainly the case you're mentioning, Renee May, the flight attendant, hoping to surprise her parents with that good news. These connect you to the story, and it's okay to feel sad. It's okay. That's going to make you remember what happened that day. If I simply tell stories of great outcomes, then I haven't told the story of 9/11. We need to remember all those different events and all those different outcomes. And I think Renee's story, and I think the story of the Hansen family with the youngest victim of 9/11 on the second flight, Flight 175, a 2-year-old girl hoping to go to Disney World. These are the stories we have to remember, along with the stories of heroism.
As anyone who obviously lived through it and covered it, and I know you were at the Globe at the time, there's 2 parts to the story, the horror of it, but to my light at least, the best I've ever seen of this country in the aftermath of it. And in one way, I thought it was twined when you put together some of those texts from the people on some of those doomed flights. And we see so much ugliness and rancor today, but almost without fail, all those last messages were what we would hope are inside people. And I thought that was really powerfully conveyed.
Thank you, Rich. And I think you're exactly right. In their worst moments, the best of them came out again and again. The voicemail messages, one after another, from these planes. I'm thinking of Brian Sweeney from the second flight, Flight 175, leaving just an absolutely beautiful voicemail to his wife that she can now, and Julie, whom I know, can recite it from memory down to the last inflection. A beautiful sort of a wish for her future from him at this worst moment. And again we saw that.
There are debates in newsrooms about whether to show the towers fall. I know that there's conversations in my world of broadcast as to, well, how many more years do we still have to carry the 9/11 memorial? I always say any attempt to anesthetize that day, now I understand for those who lost loved ones that choose not to have reminders of it, but as a nation to in any way to put, as I said, a gauze over it is, I think, not only a disservice, but I think something even worse. But I got to tell you, I thought I knew almost all the stories, and there are so many that I did not know that are in this book. And again, it's Fall and Rise. Mitchell, it's a fantastic book, and I wish you a lot of readership for it, because I think it is a national service. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Rich.
We'll be right back.